All right, so today we're diving deep into something I think a lot of us are curious about. Salt.
And specifically how salt affects your blood pressure.
Exactly. And to help us with this deep dive, we've got research from the Cleveland Clinic, the American Heart Association, Johns Hopkins Medicine.
We even found a European Cardiology Journal article so we can get a global perspective on this.
Perfect. So our main goal today is to make sure you understand just how important salt is, how it affects your blood pressure, and what you can actually do with that knowledge.
It's really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and the Cleveland Clinic article really dives deep into this whole kidney-heart salt connection. So maybe we can start there.
Sure, so your kidneys work really hard every day to filter out waste products from your blood, something like 120 quarts a day.
120 quarts, that's wild.
Yeah, and they play this critical role in regulating blood pressure. But when we have too much salt, it's like it throws a wrench in the whole system.
So is it actually like the salt is clogging things up in there?
Not exactly. It's more like it disrupts this delicate balance of fluids in your body. It messes with the osmotic gradient.
The what?
The osmotic gradient, it's this mechanism the kidneys use to keep the right balance of fluids. And when that balance gets thrown off by too much sodium, well, that's when the trouble starts.
Because fluid starts building up.
Exactly. Fluid builds up, and that leads to an increase in blood pressure.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I know we throw around the term high blood pressure a lot, but the American Heart Association article made a good point about how it's not just some random number, right? What's actually happening in our bodies when our blood pressure is higher than it should be.
Think of your blood vessels like a network of highways,
Mm.
and high blood pressure is like constant traffic. It puts a strain on everything, especially your heart.
Because it has to work harder to pump the blood.
Yes. And over time, that extra work can actually make your heart muscle get thicker and stiffer.
And that can lead to more serious problems for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, like an enlarged heart, which nobody wants. And it all ties into a higher risk of heart attacks and strokes.
That's scary.
Yeah.
And it gets even more complex because apparently how our bodies respond to salt can be really different from person to person.
Absolutely. And that's where the idea of salt sensitivity comes in, like in that European cardiology article we saw. Some people are just way more sensitive to salt than others.
Like some people can't handle a lot of caffeine.
Exactly. Even a tiny bit of extra salt sends their blood pressure through the roof.
So what actually causes some people to be more sensitive to salt than others?
Well, a lot of things can factor in, like age.
Oh, so as we get older.
Exactly. The Cleveland Clinic article actually mentioned that middle-aged and older adults tend to be more salt sensitive. But it's not just age. Genetics play a role. Even your ethnicity can make a difference.
Interesting.
Yeah. For example, the research shows that people of African descent often have greater salt sensitivity. And of course, things like obesity or having existing kidney disease can factor in too.
It's crazy to think that something so ingrained in our diets could have such a big impact, and not always in a good way.
It is, and you bring up a really important point about how we often don't even realize how much salt we're consuming. Like we always talk about the salt shaker at the dinner table, but...
It's the stuff we don't see that gets us.
Exactly. Processed foods, restaurant meals.
Speaking of, the American Heart Association article had that crazy stat about how much sodium is in just one can of soup.
Oh, yeah, I think it was over 2,000 milligrams.
2,200, if I remember correctly.
Like,
Just one can.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize that even if something says low sodium on the label, you still have to really pay attention.
So how do we navigate that? What are some practical things we can do to start getting a handle on our salt intake, especially when it comes to managing blood pressure?
Well, the good news is that lowering your sodium intake doesn't have to mean eating bland, boring food. The Johns Hopkins Medicine article actually had some really good advice on how to build healthy, low-sodium habits that you can actually stick with.
And they talked a lot about the DASH diet, right?
Yeah.
That seems to be getting a lot of attention lately.
Yeah, DHH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And it's not about cutting out entire food groups, which I like. It's more about focusing on whole foods like fruits, vegetables, lean proteins.
So more of a lifestyle change than a diet.
Yeah,
Diet.
exactly.
And they made a good point about potassium, too. It's not just about eating less sodium, but also about making sure we're getting enough of those nutrients that actually help to regulate blood pressure.
Exactly. Potassium is key. It actually helps your body get rid of excess sodium. It's like they work as a team.
What are some good sources of potassium besides bananas?
You've got sweet potatoes, beans, lentils, spinach, even avocado and yogurt have a decent amount.
And there's been so much buzz about beet juice lately. Does that actually live up to the hype?
Beets are interesting because they're high in nitrates, which your body converts into nitric oxide. And nitric oxide helps to widen your blood vessels, which can improve blood flow.
So there's some science behind it. It's
Huh?
not just hype.
No, there's definitely something there, but I wouldn't rely on beet juice alone to solve everything. It's all about a holistic approach.
It's about making those changes that work for you.
Right, like swapping out processed snacks for healthier choices, cooking more meals at home so you know exactly what's going into your food.
It's about taking control.
Yeah.
But, let's be real, those salt cravings hit sometimes. What are some ways we can fight those cravings without feeling deprived?
Spices. Remember that whole list of herbs and spices from the American Heart
Oh
Association?
yeah, it was like a secret weapon for your taste buds.
Exactly. And a lot of them have additional health benefits too, like turmeric.
Turmeric is one of my favorites. Such a great flavor.
And that bright yellow color really brightens up a dish. Plus, it has curcumin, which has powerful anti-inflammatory properties.
So we're adding flavor and potentially boosting our health at the same time. I like it. What are some other spices you find yourself using a lot?
Oh, smoked paprika is great. It has this really nice smoky flavor. And fresh herbs like rosemary, thyme, oregano, you can't go wrong with those.
Fresh herbs definitely add a level of freshness that you just can't get from the dried stuff.
Totally agree.
It really is amazing how much flavor you can add without even touching the salt shaker.
And it's something you get better at over time, like anything else, the more you experiment and try new things.
Your taste buds actually start to change.
Exactly. You start to appreciate those more subtle flavors.
It's funny, we've been so focused on the dangers of too much salt. But it makes you wonder, is there such thing as too little salt?
That's a really good question. And, most of the research focuses on the risks of eating too much salt, but there is some newer research looking into what happens when sodium levels get extremely low.
So, like with most things in nutrition, it's about finding that balance.
Exactly, finding that sweet spot, which is probably different for everybody.
And it just goes to show you that what we know about nutrition is always changing.
It's true. New research comes out all the time.
So it's about staying curious, staying informed.
And talking to your doctor, they can help you figure out what's best for you.
So as we wrap up this deep dive on salt, what would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
I'd say the biggest takeaway is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to salt.
It's not as simple as just saying salt is bad or salt is good.
Exactly. You have to look at the whole picture. Your age, your background, any health conditions you might have, even what medications you're taking. Your doctor can help you put all those pieces together and figure out what your ideal sodium intake should be.
That's such an important point. So we've given you the information, but always talk to your doctor to make sure you're making the best choices for your own health.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into salt and how it affects your health. We hope you learned some new things and maybe even feel inspired to try out some of those delicious spices and herbs we talked about.
Cheers to that.
Until next time.